So last week I was browsing the internet and I went to the Perfect Circuit website, and what do you know? The Solar 42N was actually in stock and ready for immediate shipment. So I gave it in my gas, my gear acquisition syndrome, and I put it in the shopping cart, thought about it for about 5 minutes, and hit buy. And here it is. So I've had this now for about 5 days. And for those 5 days, I have played around with it for about 30 hours. In that time, I've been able to get an overall initial impression, I think, of the Solar 42N. So what I'm going to talk about today is why I purchased it and what is new and different from previous versions of the Solar 42, and give you my overall thoughts about it, and then I'll have some demos of what it can do at the end of this video. At the time that this video was filmed, I am not sponsored by any company at all. I don't have any affiliate links or anything like that at this time. So this is my honest opinions about this machine here. Why did I purchase the Solar 42N? Well, there's a few different reasons. One of those reasons is that this is a semi-modular device, meaning basically that you can connect different things together using wires, but you can also use it without the wires patching things together. I'm trying to avoid going down that rabbit hole of modular. I don't have any actual modular gear in my studio yet, and I believe that if I start collecting modular synthesizer gear, that I'm just going to start endlessly purchasing them. You know, I'm going to get obsessed with it, and I don't want that to happen. So something like this gives you a lot of the same experience that you might have with modular gear, but it's an all-in-one package. Another thing I find with modular gear that I didn't actually know about until just a couple of years ago whenever I saw it in person is that some of those modules are complex. That is, you have to memorize key combinations, and you have to know how to do things a lot of times that are not intuitive just by looking at the module. What I like about this is that it's very intuitive. So what you see is what you get. I mean, it's pretty much like very similar to my old Korg Electribe EMX1, where everything that you can do on it is printed on the front panel for the most part. And this is the same way. You only have one small menu, and that's for the keyboard and sequencer settings. On the very last page of that menu are 4 presets, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But again, why did I buy this? Like a lot of you, I was seeking inspiration, you know. Not that I really need new inspiration. I've got all kinds of different gear in my studio. But, you know, we get this idea in our mind that that next new piece of gear is going to be the inspiration we need to finally create that perfect song that we haven't done in the past, or that perfect track. And that's what gear acquisition syndrome is all about, thinking that that next piece of gear is going to be the key to unlock your creativity. I've had enough gear over the years to know that that's not really true. Your inspiration comes from within, and if you're not inspired by the gear that you already have, then it's probably something inside of you that you need to work on, because there are people with very few pieces of gear that are churning out full tracks and full songs. There are people that do all of this just on their computer or maybe even their phone. Some of you are a Generation X like me, or older millennials, or even baby boomers, that you used to be a lot more creative in the past and you had a lot less stuff. So this is not the answer to your inspiration needs. But if you're a painter and somebody hands you a brand new canvas and a new set of brushes and different color paints and different types of paints that you've never used before, you're probably going to make something new. And that is exactly what I was hoping to get with the Solar 42, and that is so far what it has delivered. When you turn this on, play with it for a couple of hours, turn it off, come back a couple hours later, you're going to probably make something new. Now there's different reasons for that. Part of it is you don't really have a choice, okay? Let me explain that real quick. I have found that whenever you tune the main drone voices 1, 2, 4, and 5, that those are the ones that tend to drift the most. So if you are playing with a machine for a couple of hours and you have those voices nearly perfectly in tune, because you can't really get them perfectly in tune, which is another great thing about this machine. When you turn it off and then you come back later and turn it back on, they're probably going to be out of tune. And then that kind of causes you sometimes to go in different directions, though. As you're retuning those, you're like, hey, if I have to retune them anyway, may as well go ahead and make something completely different. I mentioned that not getting it perfectly in tune is one of the great things about this instrument, because whenever oscillators are slightly off, then it opens up and creates new harmonics that you might not otherwise get, and it makes the instrument feel kind of like it's alive. You know, so you have tonal variations throughout a project. So things that are in tune at the beginning of the project, a few hours later, are going to be slightly out of tune. And that's not always a bad thing. Speaking of tuning, I've seen videos on the internet where a lot of people, most people, recommend that you use an external tuner of some type. You can get one for free on your phone and just set it near the speaker and tune that way. You know, so you don't need to think that you have to have an expensive tuner. What I've been doing, though, is I'm tuning the machine to itself. Like, I will select a root note. Let's just say that I've got the two voices, VCO-A and VCO-B, that are connected to the keyboard by default. And then I'll take the low root note and I'll tune to that note. So that note may be a little bit off. It may not be, for example, a perfect C, but I don't care because I'm just tuning everything to that note. And that's fine as long as you're using this by itself. Of course, if you're going to want to use this with other instruments, then you're going to want to probably tune it, you know, so it matches the other instruments. So I bought this to open up new creative doors, and I believe that so far, in the 30 hours that I've used it, that's exactly what it's doing for me. So what's different in the 42N as compared to previous versions of the Solar 42? Well, you may have read this already, but you have speed range switches for LFO-A and LFO-B, and they're both identical. I'm going to talk about the speed switch, and this is also a kind of a quirk of this device. In the lowest setting of the speed switch, there's 3 different settings. The lowest setting, the switch all the way down, is the slowest range of oscillation. In the top setting is your middle range of oscillation, and then in the middle is the fastest range. So right off the bat, that's kind of weird. You know, you would think that it would be where the lowest is going to be the slowest, the middle is the middle, and the top is the fastest, but it's not like that. Also, the numbering is kind of weird. It has ×1 is the fastest setting, ×6 is the middle setting, and ×10 is the slowest setting, which is kind of backwards to what you would think. I'm guessing that maybe what they meant, and I'm not sure about this, so if you know, please let me know. But I'm guessing what that means is ×6 is the length of time between oscillations is 6 times longer, and then ×10 is the length of time between oscillations is 10 times longer. I mean, that's really the only way it makes sense to me. The way I understand it with the older versions, is that one of the oscillators was in the faster range and one was in the slower range. So that's the difference between this and the older versions. Another difference is the effect loading. Whenever you put in an effects card, on the previous versions, I think you had to push like a reset button or something like that to clear or load effects. Where on this, you put in a card and then you simply toggle one of the switches or both of the switches, either up or down, and that will load the effect automatically without you pushing any buttons. Like in previous editions, you can have a different effect on the left and on the right. I see that as most useful if you're going to record the left and right in mono on separate tracks and then do different things like in your DAW with those separate tracks. It allows you to send different voices to just the left side or just the right side, and then they're only going to be affected by those effects. Another difference is that there's a modulation control now for the left and right side that I don't think was present in the earlier versions as far as I can tell. There's independent amounts of modulation that you can send to the filter frequency cutoff, okay? And that, as far as I can tell, is the only thing that's affected by those two knobs. When I first started messing with them, I didn't think they did anything at all. I thought, well, maybe they forgot to wire mine up. But I did some reading on it, and then I connected the output of the joystick so that it goes into the CV in of both the left and the right side. And then I made it where one side is different than the other by setting these two controls differently. And so that whenever I move the joystick, it affects the left and right side differently. So I can see how that could be very useful. You know, it helps to enhance the stereo effect, and it's also good if you have different effects loaded on the left and right side. We talked about with those effects cards, and you got different effects, and you might not want the same filter cutoff resonance or filter. You might not want the same filter cutoff changes to be applied equally, and this allows you to do that. You just have to remember that whenever you are using those CV ins on either the left, right, or both, that you have to have the mod control turned up some. If you have it turned all the way down, then those CV ins will not have any impact at all on filter cutoff frequency. So that's important to note. Now I want to go ahead and talk about some more of the quirks of this machine. One of them is not really specific to the machine, I don't think. I think it could have been perfect circuit, or it could have been done from the factory, I'm not sure. But for some reason when I received this, all of the potentiometers, all of the knobs were turned all the way to the left, all the way counterclockwise. And I can understand why they might want to do that for like the volume controls. You don't turn it on and blow your speakers if you got the volume set too high. But they did it for everything. They did it for the pan. They did it for all of the oscillators, turn down to where it just didn't make any sense to me. It took me a little while. It's a good thing that I have some background knowledge on how oscillators and filters work and synthesizers in general, because if you don't, you might be a little frustrated. It might take you a little while to actually get noise out of this thing. So what I did is I started turning all the volumes up. I set the pans to center. I figure I could tweak those later. And I set the master volume, of course, up to about the 12 o'clock position also. And then I still wasn't getting any sound out of it. I'm like, okay, well, the keyboard, as I said, is connected to VCO A and VCO B, and I hadn't yet turned up the sustain. So you have to turn that sustain up to at least the 12 o'clock position. I mean, if it's lower, you're going to be able to hear it, but the 12 o'clock, I usually keep it a little higher than that. And then the other thing that you have to turn up is the filter cutoff frequency left and right. So if you've got the filter cutoff all the way down, all the way counterclockwise, then you're not going to hear anything at all out of the entire machine, except for maybe a very low-pitched rumble, which is what I actually kind of initially started hearing when I first turned everything up. So that's something to note. Another weird quirk with this machine, I think it's just kind of an odd design choice, you know, on the part of Elta Music, but the buttons, most of the time you expect that when you push a button in, it activates whatever it is that it's assigned to. And for the most part, that's true on the Solar 42. For example, if you want to connect one of the oscillators to the light sensor, there's a mod button for each of the oscillators, and you just push it down and then it's connected. Okay, makes sense. If you want to activate hold for any of these oscillators so you don't have to trigger them manually, you push the hold button down. Same goes for FM and AM modulation on a couple of the voices. But for some reason, when you want to activate the oscillators 1 through 5 on voice 1, 2, 4, or 5, the button has to go up to activate it. I just don't know why they did that. It's really weird. Also, I think maybe the link button has to be up to be linked and down is unlinked. That's strange, but these quirks, you know, they're not that big of a deal really to me. Another thing that you might consider a quirk is with the effects. I initially thought that maybe a couple of my effects cards don't work. It turns out that some of them have a minimum volume threshold that you have to meet. So in other words, if the volume of the instrument is at a certain point, the effect doesn't do anything at all. But once you reach that threshold level, anything above that, any volume of the instrument above that level is affected. So I found that in some of the cards, for example, the Synthex card is one of those. At lower volumes, it just didn't do anything. I had to turn things up. Now, another way of doing that would be to adjust the distortion and gain. You know, raising distortion and gain controls both. That may send enough level to that effect also for it to function. If you want to know what an effect is doing, then you use the blend control and you turn it all the way to the right, all the way clockwise, and then you only hear the effect and not the original signal. So let's talk a moment about the blend control. I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube where people are using an effect like time or infinity. Infinity is, you know, a really awesome effect for ambient style music, so I can understand why so many people like it with that lush reverb and other things that it does. But a lot of times on some songs that I've heard or some tracks that I've heard on YouTube, they have way too much of that effect going on. It seems like it's washed out and muddy and smears everywhere because, in my opinion, it's just way too wet of a signal. There is no right or wrong way to use effects, okay? If you want that really super washed out sound, that's entirely up to you, of course, you know. When it comes to creativity, it's your opinion. There is no exact right way or wrong way to do things. However, if you want clarity, where you want to be able to hear the individual voices better, try turning the blend counterclockwise, okay? Not all the way counterclockwise. If it's all the way counterclockwise, then you're only hearing the original sound and no effect at all. I find that, you know, having it at about the 11 o'clock position is often good enough. I would encourage people to try that and not just have it all the way on or all the way off. Now let's talk a little bit about those 4 presets I told you about. On the very last menu screen that you access by rotating the control on the keyboard itself, there's 4 presets, and those are important because you can set different things on this keyboard. You can set the scale. Like, for example, I like to use the Japanese scale, the flamenco scale. You can also adjust inside that menu the pressure response. So the more that you move your finger up and down, the more surface area that you cover on each of these keypads controls like vibrato, like a traditional synthesizer that has aftertouch. You can control the speed of the vibrato and the amplitude of it. Those things can be really useful. And you can do things with the sequencer, and you can set the key. If the unit was to accidentally power off, or you intentionally power it off, and then you come back and power it back on, well, all those things are gone. So that's why you have those 4 presets. So you want to make sure, after you get the keyboard set up the way you want, go to one of those 4 presets and hit the save. Now there's only 4 presets, and I think that that is actually really good. I think it goes along with the design philosophy of the Solar 42. And that is that you don't want to always be doing the same thing every time you sit down. And so only having 4 presets, I think, encourages you to do different things. What you're not going to do is get lost searching through endless presets, that's for sure. I would say that the Solar 42 has its own sound, okay? So years from now, when people look at this, they're going to talk about the Solar 42 sound. Other synthesizers have a sound, like the Roland D50. The Juno 106 is another example, of course, of a synthesizer that has its own sound. And having a sound is good because it means that instead of searching through endless presets, you can go right to that device, grab it and hook it up, and you're going to have a certain range of sounds to work with, which I think is really good. With that said, the Solar 42 still has so many options for you to get wildly creative. Don't let that thought of having the sound stop you in any way from purchasing this. I mean, it's really a lot of fun. Synthesizers like the Hydrasynth here, or the Montage, or a lot of your software synthesizers, they have so many different options that you've probably heard the term option paralysis, where you're just endlessly scrolling through these different presets to try to find the one that you want. And then a lot of times, after going through those presets for a while, you could actually lose your creativity. You know, you've spent so much time searching that, you know what, you don't even want to keep working on that track anymore. You're done. Whenever you have to take time to look at an owner's manual to figure out what something does, almost every time you pick up an instrument, I find that tends to break my creativity. You know, sometimes I get frustrated. I have in my mind, you know, something that I want to do, and I'm kind of in the flow, you know, of making a track. But then I have to pause and look at the owner's manual, or sometimes I have to search for a YouTube video to figure out, like, why is this doing this? How do I do this? And you won't have to worry about that very much with the Solar 42. I think you can probably tell that I really do like the Solar 42N. So far, I'm really happy that I bought it. It lives up to my expectations and really actually exceeds them. I think it's just a beautiful machine, not just in the way that it sounds, but in the way that it looks. I mean, this blue color, which you really can't see that well in the video right now, I really like that, and just the aesthetics overall. It's really important to me when something not only sounds good, but it also looks good. That can be inspiring too, in a weird way. Like when I walk past my Roland JP8000, it just, to me, just looks so inviting, you know, to play. So that even if it's not powered on and it's just sitting in the corner, it still inspires me. I walk past it and it calls to me, create, create. And I think the way that the Solar 42 looks and it's laid out is that kind of synthesizer. It's very inviting just to look at it. If you're thinking about getting a Solar 42, I definitely recommend it. Some of the differences between the Solar 42N and the previous versions, to me, they may not really be all that significant to most people. So if you can find a good deal on a used earlier version of the Solar 42, there's a really good chance that that would be a good choice. So those are my thoughts about the Solar 42. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you would like and or subscribe. And I'd also really like to hear your comments or questions that you have about the Solar 42. If you're thinking about getting one, if you've already got one, if you ask questions about the Solar 42N or any of the other Solar 42s, I will do my very best to answer those questions for you. So thank you for watching my video, and I leave you now with some short demonstrations of what the Solar 42 can do and how I have used it in the past 5 days that I've owned it.